I gave my daughter a house as a wedding gift, thinking her marriage would be something to celebrate, elegant, joyful, everything a mother could wish for. But before the ceremony even took place, that supposed son-in-law showed up with his entire family, parents, brother, sister-in-law, all moving in as if they owned the place. The first thing they said? "We're taking the master bedroom. She can handle all the chores." I thought this was going to be a marriage. It turns out they saw my daughter as nothing more than a live-in maid. But here's what they didn't see coming. They got proud too soon and realized it too late. My daughter is nobody's stepping stone. And in the next moment, I made sure every single one of them shut their mouths. My daughter's fiancé, Curtis Miller, seemed like a nice guy, polite, attentive to Natalie, the kind of boyfriend any parent would cautiously approve of. But his family? That was another story. No house, no car, and certainly no financial contribution to the wedding. His parents lived in a remote town, working as farmhands, while his brother and sister-in-law were barely scraping by with odd jobs in the city. Thomas and I had our doubts about this relationship from the very beginning. But Natalie was in love deeply, stubbornly, head over heels in love. She begged us, persuaded us, and insisted until, finally, we gave in. Wanting to make sure she wouldn't struggle after the marriage, we gifted her a beautiful house in the suburbs of Boston, a standalone home, completely renovated down to the last detail. Thomas oversaw everything personally, pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into custom designs, carefully selected finishes, and the best contractors money could buy. The day the renovations were finished, he was so excited he practically dragged me over to see the final result. But before we even stepped inside, an unmistakably shrill voice echoed from inside the house. "My God, is this neighborhood a prison? Every house has its doors shut. How am I supposed to visit the neighbors if nobody leaves their doors open? Curtis, go and tell them to be more neighborly and stop locking everyone out. And that front gate? What the hell is that? It looks like a damn fortress. The bars are so tight it looks like we're guarding a bank. What happens when our relatives come to visit? Are they supposed to wait outside like beggars? Curtis, get some workers over here and tear that ridiculous thing down." I didn't even need to see her to know. It was Curtis's mother, Mrs. Miller. A slow, simmering anger began to build in my chest. Curtis had brought nothing to this marriage, not a house, not a car, not even an engagement ring. Natalie had quietly bought one herself so we wouldn't worry, claiming it was from him. Of course, we found out later. But in the end, Thomas and I decided to let it go. At the very least, we thought they loved each other. What infuriated me most was his parents' reaction when they found out. Instead of gratitude or embarrassment, they scoffed, calling Natalie wasteful. A ring was just a formality, they argued, so why throw money away on something so unnecessary? And now, standing on the threshold of this house, our house, listening to this woman complain as if she were inspecting a rundown motel, I could feel my patience wearing thin. Natalie, ever the peacemaker, tried to keep things calm. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller, there's a wonderful community center nearby. If you're looking for company, they have game nights, social events, plenty of opportunities to meet people." Mrs. Miller wrinkled her nose. "Card games? Please. You think we haven't played cards before?" Then, as if we were invisible, Curtis's parents wandered off to explore, peering into rooms, inspecting furniture, acting as if they already owned the place. Not a single word of greeting. Not a single glance in our direction. Natalie was frozen between politeness and disbelief. Even Thomas, normally the calmest one, looked completely taken aback. Noticing my expression darkening, Curtis hurried over and whispered, "Mr. Dawson, Mrs. Dawson, I know my parents can be lively. They're just loud talkers, that's all. But please, I promise they really do love Natalie." Before I could answer, a loud, booming laugh echoed from the master bedroom. "Now, this is a beautiful room," Mr. Miller's voice called out. For a split second, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally appreciating what we had done for Natalie. Then I walked in, and the breath caught in my throat. There was Mrs. Miller, sprawled out on the brand new bed as if it were her own, legs crossed, shoes still on. The crisp, clean sheets were already smudged with dirt from the soles of her worn-out sneakers. And next to her, Mr. Miller, casually lighting a cigarette inside my daughter's new home. Before I could speak, he pressed the glowing tip against the solid wood nightstand, extinguishing it like it was an old ashtray. A dark, charred mark immediately appeared on the polished surface. Thomas's jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a tooth. Natalie, visibly embarrassed, nudged Curtis, silently pleading with him to intervene, but he just hung his head, shoulders slumped, looking like a chastised child. Not a word. Not a single protest. And then, as if the audacity wasn't already at its peak, Mr. Miller stretched his arms, let out a satisfied sigh, and said, "This room is perfect, plenty of natural light and a great view. We'll take this one." I almost swore out loud. For a moment I thought maybe I had misheard. Maybe my ears were playing tricks on me. But no. They had just walked into my daughter's house, taken one look around, and decided to claim the master bedroom for themselves. Thomas, Natalie, me. The three of us stood frozen, too stunned to speak. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an invasion. Mr. Miller walked out of the master bedroom, barely acknowledging our presence, and headed for one of the smaller guest rooms. He scanned the space before nodding in apparent satisfaction. "This one is perfect, ideal for our grandson." He turned to Curtis without a hint of hesitation. "Call your brother and tell him to break his lease. He and Jenny should move in with Luca right away." Then, as if the matter was already settled, he continued, "We'll put the house in Travis's name. That way, Luca will have a stable home when he starts school here. As for you and Natalie, you can move back in when you have children. Until then, there's no rush." I felt my patience snap. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, Thomas grabbed my wrist and gave me a slight shake of his head. He wanted to see if our daughter could handle this on her own. If she couldn't set boundaries now, what future could she possibly have with this family? I exhaled sharply and turned my gaze back to Curtis. The boy who had always seemed polite, articulate, and respectable in our presence stood there with his head down, his back hunched, not uttering a word. A puppet with no strings. Natalie, however, had reached her limit. Her voice turned cold. "This house was a gift from my parents. It's not a boarding house for your entire family. Don't you think you're overstepping?" The room grew tense. Mr. Miller's expression darkened, a plume of smoke shooting aggressively from his nose as his voice grew sharp. "Your house?" he asked with a wave of his hand. "You really think this place belongs to you? It's my son's house, which means it's our house. And you have the nerve to talk back to your future father-in-law before you're even married? What, you plan to kick us out once you have a ring on your finger?" He let his gaze sweep across the room, then scoffed. "Travis is still wasting money on rent every month. This house is huge. It's a shame to let all this space go to waste. Why shouldn't they move in?" Mrs. Miller chimed in instantly, her tone rising. "I get it, I really do. It's your wedding house. But honestly, isn't it a little ridiculous? 2 people living in a damn mansion?" She pointed a finger toward the smaller room. "What's the big deal if Luca stays here? You don't even have kids yet, so why let a perfectly good room sit empty?" Then, as if this were all some grand act of generosity, she added, "We don't want to take advantage of you, dear. We just don't want you going through tough times alone. We came to help you, to support you. You should be grateful." "Are you?" And then, as if sensing how icy our expressions had become, she turned her attention to Natalie and smiled. "Besides, you're about to be my daughter-in-law. It's only right that you take care of us. Cooking, cleaning. You're responsible for making sure we're comfortable. Don't you dare go slacking off just because you're the bride." My fingers clenched into fists. Natalie's hands were trembling at her sides, her breathing shallow and fast. And still, Mrs. Miller wasn't done. "Honestly, looking at you, I can tell you're not much of a housekeeper. Why don't you save yourself the trouble and just ask your father to hire a maid to take care of us?" Natalie's entire body went rigid. Tears welled in her eyes, but instead of falling, they burned hot, furious. And then, finally, she snapped. "If you want a house in the city, if you want to be taken care of, then pay for it yourselves. Stop expecting my parents to hand you everything." And a thick, uncomfortable silence filled the room. Mrs. Miller's face twisted in fury. "Curtis, do you hear this? This is the woman you're going to marry. She talks like we're beggars. Since when is her family's money more important than ours? A marriage is about sharing everything, doesn't she understand that? Curtis's face went pale. His voice rose in alarm. Natalie, you can't say things like that. Apologize to my parents. Natalie's sharp gaze turned to him, her voice as cold as steel. Curtis, if you really believe that, then take your parents and get out of my house. My parents bought me this, not you, not them. Curtis's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. Natalie, come on. You always throw these tantrums, and I always let it slide. But couldn't you show my parents a little respect? Natalie yanked her arm away, turning her back on him completely. Mrs. Miller let out a bitter laugh. You should be grateful you're marrying a man like Curtis. You think you're too good for us? Look at you. You're selfish, spoiled, and completely disrespectful. Frankly, I don't think you're even good enough for my son. She turned to Curtis, her eyes blazing. You see now? She looks down on us, just like all these city people. Natalie stared her down, her voice steady. We're not even married, and you're already trying to lay claim to what isn't yours. That isn't family. That's greed. Curtis wiped his brow, his face strained. Natalie, that was way out of line. You need to apologize. Mr. Miller took a slow step forward, exhaling smoke in our direction. His gaze settled on Thomas and me, his voice a mocking drawl. Thomas, I've got to ask, how exactly did you raise your daughter? Because I'm seeing a serious lack of discipline here. She has no respect, no humility. It's always my house, my house. It's exhausting to listen to. He took another drag from his cigarette, breathing out slowly. You wouldn't be looking down on us country folk, would you? He narrowed his eyes as he added almost lazily. You know, Curtis didn't just turn out this way on his own. He had to be disciplined as a child. Tough love, a real upbringing. That's why he's polite, hardworking, and humble. That's why he has a future in the city. He smiled, but it was a sharp, humorless grin. When your daughter marries into our family, she'll learn her place too. Curtis will teach her how to behave. He'll make sure of it. Curtis stood frozen beside him, silent. And then he nodded. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement. But I saw it. We all saw it. And in that moment, something in Natalie's eyes changed. Thomas stared at the Millers, completely dumbfounded. In all his years, he had never met a family so brazen, so shameless. I couldn't hold back any longer. The rage rose to my head, and I let it explode. How we raise our daughter is none of your business. And you? You have the nerve to lecture us? I stepped closer, my voice steady and firm. You couldn't contribute a single penny to the wedding. You have no house. You have no car. You brought absolutely nothing to this marriage. And now you have the gall to act like this house is yours? I glared at Curtis. Your son, what exactly does he bring to the table besides obedience? He depends on us for everything, so you tell me, where does he get the right to demand anything? The Millers stood there, momentarily stunned, as if no one had ever dared to put them in their place before. Then, after a beat, Mr. Miller lost his composure. Enough. Are you done talking? So what if we don't have money? Your daughter wasn't exactly a hard catch, was she? She practically threw herself at Curtis. His tone turned mocking, his smile sharp and mean. You think we don't know why? She's past her prime. If she was really worth anything, you wouldn't have to bribe a man to marry her with a house and gifts. Let's be honest. You knew she didn't have any better options. Natalie's whole body went rigid. Her hands clenched into fists, her chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. I knew what she was thinking. For years, she had been so careful of Curtis's insecurities. She never flaunted her family's wealth. She never bought herself luxury items around him. Every dinner, every movie date, she was the one paying, pretending it was nothing. And yet, here they were, twisting her kindness into desperation. Natalie took a deep, shaky breath. Then her voice rang out in the room, quiet and firm. Mom, Dad, I'm not marrying him. Thomas and I both turned to her. Her gaze was clear, and her voice was steady. I mean it. She looked at Curtis, then back at us. You were right. We come from completely different worlds, and this was never going to work. I knew it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had seen the truth, the real truth, not the illusion of love she had been clinging to. We had sensed it too, how the relationship between them had been deteriorating for months. But today, this moment, had been the final straw. Mrs. Miller wasn't about to give up. She let out a cold laugh. "Oh, please, don't play the victim. Even if you call off the wedding, my son would never take you back now." Natalie didn't even look at her. She turned to Curtis, her voice as harsh as ice. "Take your parents and leave. We're done." Curtis panicked, grabbing her wrist. "Nat, come on. Don't do this. Don't be so stubborn." She wrenched her arm away as if his touch burned her. "Don't touch me." Mr. Miller let out a sneering laugh. "Look at you, Curtis. Pathetic. She's not even your wife yet, and you can't control her. You let this slide, and she'll walk all over you for the rest of your life." His voice turned taunting. "Are you even a man?" And that was it. I was done with words. I took the glass from the table and slammed it onto the floor. The crash echoed through the house, leaving a ringing, eerie silence in its wake. Then Thomas moved. With a roar of pure fury, he lunged forward and threw a solid punch into Mr. Miller's face. The impact sent Mr. Miller staggering backward, crashing into the wall before slumping to the floor, choking on his own breath. A dark red bruise was already blooming on his cheek. Mrs. Miller shrieked, "You're insane. That was assault." Thomas stood over him, his voice low and threatening. "Say one more word, and you're not walking out of this house." Curtis froze, his face ashen. He didn't dare move. I stepped forward, and for the first time, Curtis looked afraid. His voice trembled. "I only said that because you were disrespecting my parents. If you apologize, maybe we can just forget this whole—" Before he could finish, Thomas's palm struck Curtis across the face, the force sending him stumbling back to the floor. A bright red handprint flowered on his cheek. He clutched it, stunned, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You bastard," Thomas growled. "That was for Natalie. That was for every word you let them say about her." Curtis scrambled backward, breathing in short, ragged gasps like a cornered rat. Mr. Miller, still dazed, began to push himself up when Thomas turned back to him. Mr. Miller paled. "If you lay another hand on me, I'll call the police. You'll go to jail for this." Thomas grabbed him by the collar and hauled him up, lifting him clean off the floor. "Shut up." Mr. Miller struggled, his legs kicking wildly, his shoes falling off. "Let me go, you psycho." Thomas leaned in, his voice sharp. "I see you for what you are now. Even if Natalie wanted to marry into your family, I would never allow it." Mr. Miller was trembling now, his bravado completely shattered. Thomas's grip tightened. "My daughter is smart, beautiful, and capable. She doesn't need your son. In fact, she's too good for him." His voice dropped, more dangerous. "You couldn't pay for a wedding. You couldn't buy them a house. And the second you walked in here, you disrespected us. You tracked dirt on our floors, smoked in our rooms, and acted like we owed you something. So let me make this clear." He shoved Mr. Miller backward, letting him fall to the floor like a discarded rag. "We are giving you nothing. Now get out of my house." Mr. Miller, shaking, nodded furiously. Thomas tossed his shoe at him. "Pick it up and go." Mr. Miller scrambled to his feet, nearly tripping over himself as he ran for the door. I crossed my arms, smirking. "Look at that." He ran off and left his wife and son behind. Mrs. Miller, still in a daze, suddenly grabbed Curtis's arm and dragged him toward the exit. At the door, she couldn't resist one last parting shot. "You'll regret this. Curtis can have any woman he wants. Girls would line up for him. Your daughter will end up all alone." I took one step forward, and she bolted. As they scrambled down the stairs, one of them must have tripped, because suddenly, all three of them went tumbling down the front steps, a mess of flailing arms and legs. Loud thuds echoed across the driveway. Thomas sighed and shook his head as he watched them groaning on the pavement. They deserved that. I had thought that once Natalie ended things with Curtis, she would finally be free of that family's nonsense and move on with her life. But, clearly, I had underestimated just how low they were willing to go. That night, when Natalie came home from work, she was visibly upset. She didn't say a word, just walked in and set her purse down with a heavy sigh. I frowned. "What's wrong?" Without a word, she handed me her phone. An email. from Curtis. Natalie had already blocked him on every platform imaginable: calls, texts, social media, but somehow he had found a way to wiggle back into her life. Thomas and I leaned in and looked at the email. The subject line was simple. "Natalie, since we broke up, it's only fair you pay me what you owe." Thomas raised his eyebrows. "You borrowed money from him?" Natalie let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Check the attachment." We clicked on the file, and my blood pressure nearly doubled. It was a spreadsheet, a meticulously organized, itemized list of every single dollar he had ever spent on her throughout their relationship. Tuesday, Starbucks, 2 coffees, $11.80. Valentine's Day flowers, $20. Uber ride last weekend, $14. Birthday gift card, $200. Dinners out, 12 times, total, $1,770. Split evenly, $885. Line after line, perfectly organized, tracking a full year of expenses as if it were some kind of investment he wanted a return on. And at the bottom, in bold, total, $2,897.36. "I'll be generous. Just send me $2,897 and we'll call it even." Thomas and I just stared at the screen, utterly speechless. I felt the heat rise in my face. I clenched my fists. This man had no shame. Did he really think we didn't know the truth? For nearly every dinner, movie, or trip they had taken, Natalie had been the one to pull out her credit card. Curtis had treated us to dinner once, and it was at a fast food chain. For his birthday, Natalie had bought him the latest model iPhone, spending over $1,200. On her birthday, she got a $200 gift card. And let's not forget last year, when his father had a health scare, I was the one who went to the hospital with a gift of $1,500. But now he wanted to bill her? The audacity. And to top it all off, the email ended with a not-so-subtle threat. "If you don't pay, I will have no choice but to come to your workplace and settle this in person." Settle what exactly? This wasn't just absurd, it was pathetic. The moment the elevator doors opened, I knew something was wrong. A crowd had gathered near the lobby, murmuring and pointing toward the entrance. The air was buzzing with anticipation, as if people were witnessing some kind of spectacle. And right in the center of it all were Curtis and his parents. Curtis himself was hunched in a corner, head down, as if trying to disappear from view. But his parents? They were shouting as if they were leading a street protest. Mrs. Miller's shrill voice cut through the air. "Where is your supervisor? I want to see a manager. We're here about Natalie. She owes my son money and refuses to pay." The gathered employees exchanged bewildered looks, whispering among themselves. More people slowly drifted in, drawn by the commotion. And then, the moment Natalie and I stepped out of the elevator, the entire floor went silent. Every eye turned to us. Mrs. Miller, spotting Natalie, immediately pointed a finger and raised her voice another octave. "Listen up, everyone. This woman, your coworker, dated my son for a whole year. She spent his money, enjoyed his generosity, and now that they've broken up, she thinks she can just walk away without paying him back? You tell me, is that fair?" The whispering started up again, louder this time. "Wait, is that true? I thought she came from a wealthy family? Isn't her dad an executive at the Granite Group? What if that was all just an act?" Natalie's face flushed red. I could feel her shoulders trembling. She had never been in a situation like this, publicly shamed, treated like a con artist. She had always been poised, professional, and respected. And now, in an instant, Curtis's family had reduced her to a sideshow. I stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her back, reassuring her. "I've got this." I squared my shoulders, crossed my arms, and fixed my gaze on Mrs. Miller. And just like that, at the very sight of me, her arrogance faltered. They had felt Thomas's anger once. They knew what he was capable of. Still, Mrs. Miller puffed out her chest, trying to salvage her performance. "We just want what's fair. Your daughter owes my son money, and we're here to collect." I raised an eyebrow, my voice cool and sharp. "Oh? Since we're making a public scene, let's get specific. How much, exactly, does she owe you?" Mrs. Miller hesitated for half a second, then straightened up. A lot of money. How much exactly? I pressed. She flinched slightly, but then squared her shoulders and practically yelled, $2,897.36. The room froze. A moment of complete silence. And then, a burst of laughter. Wait, what? All this fuss for less than $3,000? I thought she owed him hundreds of thousands or something. And did she just say 36 cents? Who calculates like that? The whispers turned into outright mockery. Mrs. Miller's expression faltered, but Mr. Miller stepped in, determined to save face. He reached behind him and pulled out a giant poster board, holding it up like some bizarre protest sign. This is a full breakdown of every expense. My son paid for her coffee, her movie tickets, her dinners. Look at the numbers. He began reading off the transactions, his voice booming as if he were presenting a corporate budget report. But the more he talked, the more the crowd reacted. Dude, is he seriously itemizing every coffee? Wait, Valentine's Day flowers, $20? Is this a joke? Man, even my cheapest ex wasn't this bad. He kept a log of every coffee? That's not budgeting. That's psycho behavior. So? Curtis muttered under his breath. I was just keeping track for financial planning. It wasn't about being petty. That only made it worse. The laughter exploded. I knew this was my moment. I stepped forward, keeping my voice loud and clear. Fine. Since you're demanding payment, let's do this properly. I pulled out my checkbook. The room fell silent. With deliberate slowness, I wrote out a check for $3,000, making sure everyone saw the amount. Then, with a casual flick of my wrist, I tossed it at Curtis. The check fluttered through the air and landed at his feet. There. Every last cent you claim we owe you, paid in full. Gasps went through the crowd. Mrs. Miller lunged for the check and snatched it up. For a split second, she looked victorious. Until, I smiled. Now, Curtis, I said, my voice dangerously sharp, since we're settling debts, let's talk about what you owe Natalie. Curtis froze. The color drained from his face. He knew exactly what I meant, and the moment I said it, the crowd did too. Mrs. Miller shrieked, a desperate, shrill sound. What money? What nonsense? I let out a cold laugh. Really? Let's run the numbers, shall we? I met her eyes, unflinching. For Curtis's birthday, my daughter bought him a new phone, $1,200. When his father was sick, I personally brought him a gift of $1,500. I have the receipts right here. I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. And these are just the expenses we can verify. That's already over $2,500, not including all the other day-to-day costs we haven't accounted for. I turned to the crowd, raising my voice just enough to be heard. You tell me, shouldn't he pay that money back? The response was immediate. Of course he should. That's way more than they're demanding from her. Talk about hypocrisy. The chorus of agreement was deafening, and the Millers flinched, their faces pale and rigid. Mrs. Miller, still clinging to what little scraps of dignity she had left, snorted defiantly. You're making that up. Lies. Slander. Huh. And that's when Natalie finally stepped forward. Her patience was gone. If you don't want to acknowledge the truth, fine, let's take this somewhere else. Her voice was sharp and steady. She turned, her gaze locking onto Curtis. How about we go up to your office, stand outside your company, and put this on display for your colleagues to see? Would you like that, Curtis? The color vanished from his face instantly. His company was just 2 floors above ours. There was no escape. Mrs. Miller's face twisted in fury. You ungrateful little. And then she lunged. Her hand rose, aimed straight for Natalie's face. This time, I was ready. The moment her arm moved, I stepped forward, putting myself between them. My voice was low, quiet, and firm. You had better put that hand down. A chilling silence fell over the room. Mrs. Miller's arm froze in midair. Her face went slack, stunned. I didn't blink. I didn't waver. I just stared at her. And then, slowly, deliberately, I shifted my gaze to Curtis. You came here to make a scene, but the only thing you've done is shatter what little dignity you had left. Curtis stared at the floor, silent, defeated. I took a deep breath and turned to the assembled employees, but instead of addressing them, I spoke to Natalie. Let's go. We'll take this to his company's management and handle it professionally. No shouting, no threats, just calm, decisive action. Ari. Without another word, we turned and walked toward the elevator. We didn't look back. We didn't need to. The damage was already done. The supervisor arrived quickly, his expression polite but bewildered. "Can you tell me what's going on?" he asked, looking between us and the growing crowd. I pulled up Curtis's email, the one he had so vehemently sent demanding money. I showed it to him, summarizing the situation calmly. "We are not here to argue." My voice was firm and unwavering. "We simply want a fair resolution." The supervisor quickly read the email, his frown deepening as I continued to explain. Then, just as I finished, one of his assistants came over and whispered something in his ear. His eyes shot to me, and his demeanor shifted almost instantly. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Dawson from Granite's CEO?" I nodded, offering a calm smile. "I am." Immediately, his posture straightened. His tone became formally polite, almost apologetic. "I am sincerely sorry this situation escalated to this point. Our company takes professionalism and ethics very seriously. I will speak with Curtis privately to address this matter." Then he turned to Curtis, and his tone hardened. "Curtis, I am truly disappointed. Keeping detailed accounts of personal expenses, demanding repayment after a breakup, and causing a public disturbance in front of another company's office. This is completely inappropriate." Curtis's face went white. He opened his mouth, grasping for an excuse. "No, I didn't think it would turn into this. The supervisor cut him off. "You have not only embarrassed yourself, but you have also damaged this company's image. This will be reported to Human Resources." Curtis visibly deflated, his head bowing lower and lower, his hands twisting as he nodded weakly. His arrogance? His entitlement? Completely gone. I nodded, thanking the supervisor politely. "There." I turned to Natalie, ready to leave. But just as we took a step, "Wait, this isn't over." Mrs. Miller's sharp, shrill voice cut through the air. I paused, then slowly turned back, fixing her with a calm, unreadable gaze. I didn't need to say anything, because in that moment, everyone knew exactly who had already won. A few weeks passed, and life finally seemed to be returning to normal. Natalie fell back into her routine work, coffee with friends, weekend yoga sessions. She looked better, lighter, the weight of the past stress gone from her shoulders. Thomas and I had an unspoken agreement not to bring up Curtis or anything that had happened. We didn't want to risk reopening wounds that were still healing. She was doing well. At least, in front of us, she made sure everything looked fine. Until that night, she came in with takeout in hand, but something about her expression was off. I watched her out of the corner of my eye as I set the table. "Work okay?" I asked casually. She hesitated then, without a word, handed me her phone. He had reached out again. The screen showed a text from an unknown number, but the words were painfully familiar. "Curtis." "Natalie, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. I know I messed up. I shouldn't have listened to my parents, and I never should have taken my frustration out on you. I have nothing left now, but I want to start over. Will you give me another chance?" I exhaled slowly and looked at her. "This is the third one." Her voice was low. "I haven't responded." I nodded. "Good. Silence is the clearest answer." She sighed. "It's just, I don't get it. Is he actually sorry, or does he just hate losing?" "Probably both," I said evenly. "But that's not your problem anymore. His growth is not your responsibility." She stared out the window, not saying anything. I knew her heart wasn't wavering. It wasn't love she was struggling with. It was habit. The emotional residue of investing so much in someone, only to realize it was never worth it. Then, just a few days later, things took a turn. That evening, she walked in with a different look, not sadness, but something colder, sharper. She set her phone on the counter. "Mom, look at this." I picked it up, and the moment my eyes fell on the screen, my stomach turned. A social media post. An anonymous message. A blurry photograph and edited video clips were attached, carefully pieced together to paint a false narrative. The caption was nothing short of cruel. "A real-life gold digger. extorted her ex after the breakup, and flaunted her wealthy family. I guess she's not so untouchable anymore, is she? A slow, simmering rage built in my chest. Do we even need to guess who did this? She shook her head. I can't trace the account, but look at the content. These photos, these videos, it's all from Curtis. He cropped himself out, used an anonymous account, but we both know. I clenched my jaw. So this is what he's resorting to now. She let out a slow sigh, the exhaustion heavy in her voice. I just wanted to move on. Why won't he let me? I took her hand and squeezed it firmly. Because he's not obsessed with you, he's obsessed with his own ego. He can't move forward, so all he knows how to do is drag people back down with him. That same night, I contacted an old friend from college, now a lawyer at a well-known firm. By the next morning, we had formally issued a legal notice demanding the removal of the anonymous defamatory content, along with a request to preserve the poster's IP information for potential legal action. We also filed a civil complaint for harassment, ensuring an official record of Curtis's actions. For the moment, things seemed to quiet down. But Curtis wasn't done. A week later, Natalie received a package in the mail. Inside was a handwritten letter from Curtis. The tone dripped with regret, guilt, and nostalgia. He wrote about their first date, her smile, the nights she stayed up looking after his sick father, every line carefully crafted to pull at her heartstrings. But then, the last few sentences revealed the truth. I can't accept you being gone completely. You know I have nothing left. You were my only light. If you don't come back, I don't know what I'll do. This wasn't an apology. This was emotional blackmail. My expression darkened as I read the final words. Without hesitation, I called our lawyer and began the process of filing for a restraining order. That afternoon, Natalie and I went to the courthouse together. She sat on a bench, clutching the letter so tightly her knuckles turned white. Mom. Her voice was low and tight. I know I'm handling it, but why is it still so exhausting? I put a hand on her shoulder. You're not tired, you're healing, and that takes time, but you're already doing everything right. She exhaled slowly, then met my gaze. For the first time, there was no hesitation in her eyes. I'm not going to let him hurt me again. I smiled. That's my girl. A few weeks later, the court officially granted the temporary restraining order, legally forbidding Curtis from contacting or approaching Natalie in any way. We also provided all supporting evidence to Granite's legal team, ensuring it was on the record should any future issues arise. This time, we didn't wait for him to apologize. We didn't give him a single opening to reappear in our lives. Natalie was finally free. She was no longer the girl who tiptoed around others' emotions. She was no longer the girlfriend who would bend, apologize, or try to fix someone who refused to change. She had stepped fully into her own, and, without even realizing it, she had started moving beyond the boundaries she had once set for herself. She poured herself into her work, refusing to let emotions sidetrack her focus. Instead of hesitating, she took on multiple projects at once, proving her ability to thrive under pressure. She knew what she wanted, and more importantly, what she no longer needed. Then came the regional business conference. Granite chose her to represent the firm at a major industry networking event. She took the stage with quiet authority and delivered a presentation with confidence and precision. The audience executives, investors, and industry leaders listened. They nodded in approval, and at the end, several corporate representatives from across the states approached her, eager to exchange business cards, hoping to explore future collaborations. That one event subtly but irrevocably shifted the course of her career, and with it, her life. At a casual networking lunch after the conference, Natalie met Ethan Parker. Ethan was one of the co-founders of East Bay Capital, an MIT graduate and a member of a well-known family of San Francisco entrepreneurs. But unlike the arrogance often associated with privilege, he was thoughtful, articulate, and composed. Their conversation was brief, no unnecessary small talk or intentional exchanging of contacts, just a natural, spontaneous conversation before they both went on with their day. But the following week, Natalie received a handwritten letter. It wasn't a grand declaration or an eager invitation. It was a sincere note of thanks, acknowledging the strength of her presentation and offering thoughtful feedback on her business model. Plus, he included a book on leadership and strategy, something he thought she might find interesting. She was surprised, impressed even. I glanced at the letter and smirked. Well, at least this one didn't send an invoice after the breakup. Oh, Natalie chuckled, but didn't reply. Still, there was something different in her expression, a quiet composure that hadn't been there before. There was no sudden whirlwind romance or rushed advances. Over time, their conversations grew more frequent, but never forced. They exchanged industry insights, attended small business forums, and occasionally grabbed coffee to discuss market trends. Until one evening, Ethan was driving her home when he suddenly stopped the car. Turning to her, he said, "I don't know how you feel about me." His voice was steady and sincere. "But I want you to know that I like you. Not because of your work, or because you're brilliant or independent, but because when I'm with you, I feel like life is something worth living fully." Natalie was frozen for a moment. She hadn't expected this, not so soon, not so directly. She sat in silence, weighing his words. Then finally, she nodded. "I don't know what the future holds," she admitted quietly, "but I'd like to find out." For the first time in her life, she walked into a relationship without fear, without pretense, without hesitation. And to our surprise, Ethan soon introduced her to his parents. Mr. and Mrs. Parker were kind, intelligent, and welcoming. They never pried into personal matters, never judged or scrutinized. Instead, they treated Natalie with the same respect they would any capable adult. At dinner, Mrs. Parker personally prepared a small dessert and smiled warmly. "This is the first time Ethan has ever brought someone home. I had to make sure I got it right." Later that night, Ethan's father took Thomas aside and said quietly, "She's remarkable, smart, poised, and she knows what she wants. We're glad Ethan met someone like her." There was no entitlement, no demands, no pressure for submission, just a family that valued genuine connection and mutual respect. It was everything Curtis's family was not. And for the first time, we could all see it. Natalie was finally in a place where she was safe, where she was wanted. But good things rarely go unnoticed. One afternoon, a photo appeared online, a candid shot of Natalie and Ethan at a business event. With Ethan's last name attached, it didn't take long for the picture to circulate within industry circles, and soon, the news found its way to Curtis. That evening, Natalie left her office to find Curtis waiting for her near the entrance. His face was pale, his expression twisted. "So this is it?" He stepped closer, his voice low and resentful. "You left me and ran straight into the arms of another man?" Natalie didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye. "Curtis, leave. You have no right to question me." His nostrils flared. "You were planning this all along, weren't you? You were already with him when you were still with me." Her voice hardened. "You need to stop. I have a restraining order against you. If you follow me, I'm calling the police right now." Curtis's face contorted, his hands clenching at his sides. He was about to lash out again, when another presence stepped forward. From the parking garage, Ethan walked over, his posture calm, his expression unreadable. But his presence alone changed the atmosphere. He moved to Natalie's side, his voice quiet but firm. "I don't know who you are," Ethan said, "but if you take one more step toward her, I'll be the one to call the police." Curtis blinked, startled. He hadn't noticed Ethan's arrival, and he certainly hadn't expected this confrontation. "You're the new boyfriend, huh?" His voice turned taunting, but there was a crack in his bravado. "You think you're better than me?" Ethan didn't take the bait. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said calmly. "What matters is that you understand you don't get to hurt her anymore." There was no shouting, no dramatic showdown, but the weight of his words suffocated Curtis more than any fight ever could. For a moment, Curtis just stood there, looking at them. Natalie, standing tall, unaffected by his anger. Ethan, at her side, steady, unmovable, and something broke inside him. He finally understood. The woman he had once criticized, belittled, and controlled was now standing in a different world, bathed in a light he could never reach. And him? He no longer even had the right to stand by her side. As they walked away, Curtis stood frozen, his face unreadable, a storm of rage, regret, and finality. But the world had moved on without him, and Natalie never looked back. After dinner, Natalie and I walked along the narrow path, our steps slow and unhurried. The gravel crunched softly under our feet, and behind us, the trees swayed in the evening breeze, their shadows casting long patterns on the ground. This was a place we used to visit often. As a little girl, she loved to hop on the smooth stones by the lake, and my heart would leap into my throat every time she teetered at the edge. I would reach out, grabbing the sleeve of her jacket, trying to keep her balanced. Now, her steps were steady and measured. Her gaze was clear and firm. "Do you remember how I used to run to the water to collect stones?" she asked suddenly. I smiled. "Of course. You always said each one was unique, that you had to take them all home and wash them clean." She let out a soft laugh. "Back then, I thought every little piece of the world was worth keeping. And now?" She paused, thoughtful. "Now, I know some things are meant to be kept in your heart, not in your life." I turned to look at her. She was no longer the little girl who panicked when things went wrong. "Mom," she spoke again, her voice softer. "What do you think people chase their whole lives?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out at the water, where the sunlight was reflecting in soft, shifting ripples. "I think it's different for everyone, but for me, it's peace." She raised an eyebrow. "Not happiness?" I shook my head. "Happiness is tricky. Sometimes it's just other people's expectations. Sometimes it's just a fleeting rush. But peace? That's something you build. It's not given. And it's not something that comes overnight." She was quiet for a long time, absorbing my words. Then, in a voice as soft as the evening air, she said, "I used to think I needed to be loved to feel like my life had meaning. But now, I think learning to love myself is the most important thing. It's enough." I nodded. "It's more than enough." She smiled at me. "You've always known that, haven't you?" I didn't answer. I just held her gaze. And in that moment, I knew she no longer needed me to protect her. She had learned to stand in the wind, to listen to the water, to hear the voices of the world, and decide for herself which ones mattered. We kept walking, side by side, along the edge of the lake. In the distance, a few ducks floated lazily on the water, their movements sending out soft ripples, one after another. And suddenly, I understood this path. We had walked it countless times before. The difference was, back then, she always turned to me to find her way. Now, she could walk it alone. But every once in a while, she still chose to hold her mother's hand. And that was enough. I'm Natalie, and I once truly believed that love could conquer all. When I met Curtis, he was quiet, reserved. He carried himself with a seriousness that made him seem more mature than the guys around him. I mistook that restraint for depth. I confused his frugality with a practical, down-to-earth approach to life. Even when my friends gently warned me he was cheap, I dismissed it as harsh judgment. The first time he took me to dinner, it was at a fast food joint. He ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and told me, "Don't order too much, it's wasteful." I smiled, said it was fine, and convinced myself he was just a man who valued practicality. He never gave gifts. On Valentine's Day, he sent me $5.20 on Venmo, joking that it's the thought that counts. And God, I was touched. I thought it was charmingly romantic, minimalist, and mature. It took me a long time to realize that his so-called practicality was just greed in disguise. I never kept score with gifts. For his birthday, I bought him a new iPhone. When mine came around, he gave me a $200 gift card, told me to buy myself something nice, and then, with a straight face, added, "Couples shouldn't measure love with money." And I, like a fool, nodded along. He didn't have a car, so I did the driving. He didn't have a house, so I told him it didn't matter. He told me he couldn't afford a ring yet, so I secretly picked one out myself. I had my best friend buy it, so I could surprise him on our wedding day. Now, looking back, I can't believe how blind I was. And that was just the beginning. The first time I visited his home, his mother barely looked at me before asking coldly, "Do you cook?" Before I could answer, she added, "City girls don't have a place in the kitchen. But, let me tell you, that won't fly in our family." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, and said, "I know how to cook and I'd love to learn more." She didn't smile. She just grunted, as if something had been confirmed. I thought if I was just kind enough, sincere enough, she would eventually accept me. I didn't realize that was just the start of her endless tests and criticisms. She mocked my clothes, saying I dressed too flashy. She mocked my career, saying a woman who's too ambitious is hard to control. She mocked my personality, saying I wasn't gentle enough to be a good wife. Curtis? He never once stood up for me. All he ever said was, "That's just how she is, don't take it personally." At the time, I thought he was keeping the peace. Now, I realize, he was just a coward. His father was even more direct. "You won't have time for a job once you start having kids. No need to waste energy thinking about a career." They believed I shouldn't have personal ambitions, that I shouldn't have my own space, that I shouldn't even have my own opinions. And God help me, I told myself to endure it. I thought, things will change after we're married. But the moment that truly woke me up was the house. Curtis told me he couldn't afford to buy a home, so my parents offered to gift us one as part of my dowry. He didn't hesitate. He grinned and ran to tell his parents. And that's when they showed their true colors. His mother immediately declared, "We'll take the master bedroom. The second bedroom will be for Luca, our grandson, and Travis and his family will be moving in too." I tried to be rational. I tried to talk it through. She laughed in my face. "Your mother bought you a big house. Lucky you. But that doesn't mean you get a say. Curtis?" He just stood there, silent. Later, when I confronted him, he pulled me aside and whispered, "She's just talking. Don't take it so seriously." And that was the moment I finally saw it. I was never their daughter-in-law. I was a resource, a house, a wallet, a convenient stranger who could provide, but never be respected. And the most absurd part? After we broke up, Curtis spread rumors at work, calling me cold, entitled, and materialistic. Then he had the audacity to send me an invoice, listing every coffee, every meal, every ride he'd ever paid for, demanding I pay him back $3,000. I laughed. I actually laughed. The same girl who bought her own engagement ring was now being called a gold digger? I transferred him the full amount. Not because I owed him anything, but because I wanted to shut the door on that chapter forever. And after that, his life fell apart. He was fired from his job. His family's reputation took a hit. Every resume he sent out was met with silence. People said he looked worn out, miserable, lost. I wouldn't know, because by then I had stopped caring. Sometimes, I think about the girl I used to be, the one who silenced herself for love, the one who sacrificed her boundaries, the one who kept telling herself to endure just a little longer. And yes, it hurts to remember her. But more than anything, I feel free, because now I understand. A true partnership isn't one person constantly making up for the other's shortcomings. I was never his savior. I was never his family's financial plan. I walked away, and I lived better. And him? He was eaten alive by his own greed, his own selfishness. This is my quietest, most dignified revenge. No shouting, no scheming, no hating, even. Just living a life he can never touch. This time, I bow to no one. This time, I walk forward, just for me.